What happens when the sensitive subject around leaving a religion unfolds in the most public way possible, that is, online? Well, that's what's been happening with the use of a hashtag. Thousands of former Muslims around the world have been explaining why they left Islam and are using the hashtag ExMuslim because.
Well, great for them. Ex-Muslims face a substantial amount of hatred thrown at them from the Muslim right, as much as, or in many cases outside the West, even more than is thrown at them from the Christian right. Christian supremacist wingnuts and other Muslim conspiracy hacks view them as jihadis in disguise, whilst over 20 Islamic countries criminalized apostasy, several on penalty of death. And it's not just the legal system. In nations like Egypt, out of the 74% of Muslims who believed Sharia should be the law of the land, 86% said that the punishment under said law for apostasy should be death. Now, that may be the extreme, but even in countries like the UK, the aggression and harassment ex-Muslims receive from family and the local community leads to a great feeling of isolation. So for them to have this movement online where not only do those who are out, so to say, can partake, but anonymous users can contribute and benefit from this, makes it a lifeline for some. And in that I can only support it.
It's prompted a strong counter-reaction, with some saying it's hateful.
Excuse me? How could anyone consider the coming together of people to acknowledge their existence and declare it out loud and share their experiences of survival both physically and psychologically as hateful? Our support groups for victims of rape and domestic abuse also hateful towards whichever demographic the perpetrators are from? You see, this is why I'm doing this video. I woke up to find my Twitter feed, which seems to have a rather large ex-Muslim majority, blowing up into a fit of rage, and not because of that little soundbite, but rather what followed.
I'm Anne-Marie Tomczak and this is BBC Trending. Also on the programme, the Russians refusing to go on holiday to Turkey after a Russian plane was shot down by a Turkish fighter jet. With me in the studio to discuss all of this is...
Mubin Azar. I'm a journalist and filmmaker, and one of my specialist areas is the Muslim community in Britain.
And I'm Vitaly Shevchenko. I work for BBC Monitoring, and I have spent years watching what's going on in the former Soviet Union.
Right, well, welcome guys. Great to have you with us in the studio today. Now, let's begin the programme with what is often a complex, sensitive, private and personal subject. Faith and leaving the faith.
You cannot be serious. I mean, since when has faith ever been a private matter in the UK? If this was a Norwegian radio station, maybe you'd have more basis, but the recent Dawa movement there would suggest that Islam in Scandinavia has not gone the same way as Christianity in Scandinavia. Meanwhile, here in the UK, religion is far from private. Dawa groups are hopping from university to university and ambushing people in the streets in attempts to convert them, and this is not viewed as weird at all in their communities. Often it's viewed as noble and even divine. Muslims do not keep to themselves, regardless where they are. My partner, for example, has an Indian name, and yet to stop Islamic preachers targeting her, she used to go by the Islamic name Zara. This happened to the point that now she has to include her fake name as a middle name on places such as LinkedIn and Facebook because so many people she worked with in the past did not know who she was from her real name when she finally escaped that environment and began using her real name again. Only a couple months ago, she was targeted by a Muslim cohabitant who demanded justification for her not being a person of the book after she just returned from the late night shift at her place of work. I had to find out about how he refused to let her sleep until 2 in the morning after their Pentecostal landlady had also used this as an excuse to join in. Islam and the Abrahamic religions in general are not really private.
It's never an easy subject to discuss, and this week we'll be talking specifically about Muslims who've left Islam and they're using a hashtag that's been trending all week. That hashtag is ExMuslim because, and a significant portion of the conversation around this is coming from the UK. I'm joined by Mobeen Azhar, who has extensively reported on the British Muslim community. So this is familiar territory for you, Mobeen. Have you seen the hashtag that started last week?
I have, yeah. And this is something that was quite unexpected. It was the top trending tweet in Britain. So, it just really spread like wildfire. And, this was all to do with people's personal experiences. So it wasn't academic. It was to do with what people really felt, the kind of climate they'd grown up in.
Not really academic. It's a Twitter hashtag, not a peer-reviewed journal, and it's not pretending to be. It was intended to bring to attention that ex-Muslims exist because due to the current climate, they are often too afraid to come forward, even in the West, as it can lead to ostracization and blatant discrimination, e.g. in being expected not to and even actively barred from sharing their experiences. These statistics don't exist because no sociologist has really been willing to touch this field because of the taboo surrounding it. That comes later once society has become safe enough for these individuals to come forward and discuss their experiences as an ex-Muslim without being targeted by practicing Muslims. This is simply the first steps in which, like the LGBT plus community, these people are coming out and saying, hey, we kind of exist and we need support. And I make that comparison as it really does fit here and is one of the reasons I hope I'm a little bit more empathetic about this situation.
And then there was a big response as well. There's quite a few people joining the debate and saying, this is Islamophobic, this is opportunistic, this shouldn't be happening right now.
So people were really upset about it as well because it's such a sensitive issue.
And I think a lot of this has to do with timing. Of course it does. And, we're in a situation at the moment where Muslims are making the headlines. I've worked with the Muslim community a lot in Britain. And I think...
So you understand the pressures that Muslims face if they are going to make that decision and then when they do or don't.
Absolutely. And, I think there's lots of Muslims who really feel in a British context or a European context that they have to fly a flag or nail their colours to the mast. And that's a real sign of the times. And a lot of this stuff is really rooted in identity politics. We're in a situation where Muslims, I think, feel slightly attacked. And they feel that their lives and their beliefs are being constantly discussed. They're on the front page of lots of newspapers constantly. And so for that reason, I think a lot of people thought this was bad timing.
I'm sorry, but what? The conversation is about ex-Muslims and how the Islamic community treats apostates. You've taken that perfectly good discussion that is rarely had and turned that into a platform to continue to complain about how Muslims are targeted and how Muslims feel attacked. This is given with strong undertones that maybe these people are simply coming out as ex-Muslim because they want to be freed from this perceived attack, rather than they take issue with Islam itself. As for the timing aspect, it again shows a great deal of inhuman thought where the victim is expected to remain silent until the culprit's demands are met. In this case, the end of Western supremacists attacking Muslims. Now I say Western supremacy rather than white supremacy in light of the fact that Islam is not a race but a socio-political theology centered around a geographical location. Now, I must clarify that by using this term, I am referring to those that view the West as the standard of exceptionalism that can do no wrong and never has done any wrong. This also typically proclaims Christian roots to all good things that do exist here. Thankfully, they get back on track for a little while.
But what about the consequences of making that decision to step away from Islam?
There can be huge and devastating consequences. I mean, let's look at the theory first and let's look at the practice. So in theory, there are plenty of Muslims, historical and current, who would say, there's a quote from the Quran which says, "To you is your religion and me is mine." And in classical Islam, this has been used as an example of how there is freedom of belief. In a practical sense, does that translate? Well, I would argue it doesn't. You know, there's 13 countries globally where declaring that you're not Muslim is punishable by death.
So this is the sin of apostasy.
Exactly. The sin of apostasy can be punished by death. So there's a really strong argument that throughout the Muslim world, there isn't this concept of freedom of belief. And I think that's why with this particular hashtag, you had such a response.
Well, I think the last time I looked at the hashtag was about 100,000 uses of it. It was actually started by this group, the Council of ExMuslims of Britain. And one of the first people to use the hashtag was their spokesperson, Mariam Namazi.
She herself is an ex-Muslim. And I think people who support her would absolutely say she's a human rights activist. In fact, it was a few years ago that she won, it's the Secularist of the Year award. It's not the sexiest title, but that was a prize that she won.
Why is the title not appealing? Secularism simply means religious equality, as said equality can only exist in a society where the state is not able to force a religious belief onto its members. It'd be like going, they won LGBT plus activist of the year. Now that's not really the sexiest title. What is there to mock about personally advancing religious equality? I'll file this under unwarranted douchebaggery.
I think people that are opposed to her would say that she's quite opportunistic.
Well, I've been speaking to her about how this hashtag started, and this is what she told me.
One of our activists said that being ex-Muslim is not being anti-Muslim. It's just criticizing an idea that I don't agree with. And that's actually how it started. And we never expected it to trend in this way. We actually initially said that we're collecting statements from people for December 10th, which is International Human Rights Day, to show that leaving Islam, saying one is ex-Muslim is a basic right. But it just took off, and it shows just how much people needed to express themselves via this hashtag.
What kind of stories have you noticed people sharing around this hashtag online?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some really funny ones, of course, like, oh, you know, I'm ex-Muslim because I wanted to eat pork. And then there are, of course, those that are saying, you know, my father is a sheikh and he's forced me to marry. My own mother told me that I deserve to die because I've left Islam. So there's a wide range of stories. A lot of the hashtags just said that they felt that they're not alone, because I think a lot of people do feel alone and isolated, which shows how much people need, you know, to know that they're not alone and that there are many of us out there.
Is there a risk that there are others out there who would look at a hashtag like this, might not necessarily be prepared for the kind of backlash that might lie in store for them?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone is encouraging anyone to take a risk, because if anything, we know the risks more than anyone else. For example, even though I don't have threats from my family, I do have it from Islamists all the time. But again, you know, blaming us for speaking up for the death threats and the intimidation that Islamists impose is sort of blaming the victim in a way. You know, how else are we going to challenge this movement if we're not able to say that we think differently and we have a right to think differently?
One of the tweets that I noticed was saying that this hashtag more or less was giving people an opportunity to bash Muslims. What do you have to say in response to a statement like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, those who bash Muslims bash me as well, because we all look the same to them. I've got a Muslim name. The minute I defend refugee rights, they tell me to go back home. But we've been very clear from the start that we're ex-Muslim not because we want to be anti-Muslim, but because we want to defend the rights of ex-Muslims. And there has to be a space for that.
Can you speak is one thing, when to speak is another. And if you look at the recent news events, let's say, for example, what happened in Paris, the Paris attacks, let's look at the refugee crisis around Europe. Did it occur to you that this was possibly not the right time to put out a hashtag like this?
Yeah, but Paris is maybe your marker as someone in the West, but our marker has been bombings in Iraq, in Afghanistan, Sharia law in Saudi Arabia for decades. That is our marker. To see it only within a context of Paris doesn't see the humanity of all those people who are dying day in and day out.
So quite a strident tone coming from Mariam Namazi, and the way she uses the term Islamists.
I mean, it's quite uncompromising. And I think one of the problems that might come from that is Islamist broadly refers to this idea of Islam, the faith, being used as a political ideology. Now, the fact is, within that, there are many shades of grey. And I think lumping these people together is not going to be the most helpful thing and could be misconstrued and could be seen as quite problematic.
Except she is not lumping everyone in together, as is unquestionably shown in how she distinguishes between groups using the word Muslim when describing the general believers of the Islamic faith, and then Islamist when discussing those who would very much like to silence her dissent of their faith. Also, in what way was she strident? She's not forceful and she's not aggressive in any honest sense. She keeps the conversation on track and rightfully breaks down your attempts to catch her out with Paris, which only acts as a red herring. Ex-Muslims were in no way related to what happened there. So for you to want them to suffer until Western supremacists calm down is just ridiculous. But here is the clincher. Western supremacists will never stop being pissed off, as shown through Donald Trump dredging up claims of the non-existent celebrations held post 9/11. To expect one group of victims to suppress their vital need for community because their aggressor faces issues of their own is just simply wrong. It's like demanding a rape victim to remain silent because the rapist's gran died recently. It's absolutely inhuman.
But let's just talk about her tone again, because you described it as uncompromising. How do you think what she's saying is going to be interpreted by Muslims around the world?
Well, this really takes us back to this thing about Muslims feeling attacked. Because I think pretty much for 15 years now, you could say since 9/11, a lot of the Muslim community around the world has felt that they are on the defensive. They feel that there's fingers being pointed at them. I think in terms of Mariam's tone, it might make Muslims feel attacked again.
Well, they have demonstrated that on social media. There has been quite a defensive tone, even a counter hashtag Muslim because, and then outlining the reasons why they're Muslim and defending the faith. Some people found the ex-Muslim because hashtag quite offensive. One tweet I saw said this campaign is hateful. It paints all Muslims as bad. Almost 2 billion humans can't all be the same. And then they use the hashtag no to bigotry.
These people are completely isolated. They have no community. Unlike you, they're afraid to come out to their family as it can destroy relationships, have them cast out into the streets and sometimes even assaulted. And yes, I am on about in the West, both verbally and physically. Online gives them a way not just to connect, but to make their presence known in a safe manner. As Azhar himself noted, for the past 15 years, Muslims have felt attacked. Now, some of the critique aimed at Islam has been completely valid, whilst other parts have just been bogus, e.g. the before-mentioned example that Trump keeps harping on about. This is not going to go away anytime soon. What do you want them to do? Wait another 15 years? Before Paris, you'd have likely made reference to the Syrian crisis. Before that, the Tunisia beach shootings, etc., etc., all the way back to 9/11. No matter when the campaign started, it would always be too soon to you. And yes, there are more markers than what happens in the West, as she noted. These people are starting to come out, and no longer can any criticism of Islam simply be labelled as racist and Islamophobic, as it is coming from an internal source, and that scares people like Azar. That scares them because the cost of silence is being rejected as too high by people who don't want to live in a world of constant fear.
Other practicing Muslims try to engage with the hashtag, which is interesting. And one of those is Rashid Dar. He works with a think tank over in Washington, DC. And he posted a tweet where he offered to meet ex-Muslims and have a coffee and have a chat.
I think I would say to those on the other side of the table to frame it as more of a conversation, right? Maybe on both sides, let's tone down the vitriol. And let's just say, let's have the conversation honestly and openly. And that doesn't mean that it needs to be tweeted or live broadcast or anything. Let it be that coffee chat between two people who are just exchanging a heart-to-heart about why they can't do this or why they can do this, right? Meaning practice Islam. And also, I think the other thing that people on the other side can do is really make it seem like a sincere invitation. I think what a lot of Muslims have a very fine-tuned radar about is when they feel that people are only interested in what their faith believes with regards to, the hot button issues. I want to talk about what my faith is. I want to talk about the feeling one gets when they put their face on the ground and they prostrate to God alone. I want to talk about that feeling. It's actually just as related to these other issues of terrorism, women's rights, and human rights, and these other sorts of things, apostasy, all the hot button issues. And so when Muslims talk, let them talk about not just about what they aren't, but also about what they are in a positive sense.
I'm just going to go straight to the point and get to the issue here. Many of the people who have been able to come forward and add their experiences to the ex-Muslim because hashtag have remained anonymous to family members and their local community, in demanding that victims drag themselves to you rather than expressing themselves in a format that makes them feel secure, is vile. Not to mention the desire to control the conversation and steer it away from issues that have massive impact on society. Those hot-button issues, such as when dealing with apostasy, homosexuality and women's rights, are life and death issues for many of these people. To deny them this is absolutely atrocious. Now, I am a stubborn prick who will debate anyone to the ground, but not everyone is as tenacious as me. I would not expect a trans or gay person who is scared to come out in fear of their family's rejection and the reaction of their wider community to sit down and discuss their existence, their being, with a transphobic or homophobic preacher who wants to convert them, as that's what this really is. You want to force these people out into the open and then into an environment where you can control the conversation and emotionally blackmail them into staying silent. There is plenty of conversation to be had in this format where they feel safer. Reply to the tweet, write a blog, or make a response video. That way, both sides can be heard, yet you do not have the direct access to physically intimidate them.
What do you make about what he's saying?
I think, the important point that I think comes from that is there is that one-on-one dialogue, which can be really useful, but we're not seeing that on.
Well, social media is not like a coffee chat.
Exactly, it's not like a coffee chat. A lot of these conversations have a theological point of view. There's politics to explore. There's cultural dynamics to explore, and it's a very nuanced argument. And Twitter might not be the best place to explore those nuances.
Thanks, Mobeen. That's a discussion that's definitely going to keep going on, I'm sure.
Let's just get this straight. the BBC is suggesting through this, pausing to highlight that it's the interviewer who's pushing the message, that ex-Muslims should abide by the rules laid down by Muslims, regardless of whether or not Muslims like Azhar have personally attacked ex-Muslims. He, as well as the BBC presenter, are supporting the violence they do face when they come out. This is the very thing that this hashtag is fighting and bringing to attention. Now, why the BBC made the decision to have a Muslim on live and not a spokesperson of the hashtag, or even simply reverse the order so that the Muslim is recorded first with their concerns and then it's the hashtag supporter on live, displays which side the BBC is outright supporting in this. This is even though they have demonstrated that they have access to Namazi, and she gave them 4 extra contacts on behalf of ex-Muslims because the fact is that the Pandora's box has been opened and these individuals want to do everything to close that off again. This, to my knowledge, is the first coming together of ex-Muslims online en masse. That is scary to Islam, as it is evidence that their grip of fear is losing power, not simply in the West, but globally, as not everyone taking part in this campaign is from the UK. Now, there's a reason I feel strongly about this personally, even though I'm just going to say I am not an ex-Muslim. I feel strongly as an LGBT plus activist working full-time offering support because I have seen the damage that comes from living inside a closet firsthand. I may not be able to speak on behalf of the LGBT plus community, but on behalf of myself, I would like to say to every ex-Muslim in the West who is afraid to let their family know that they are no longer a believer because they fear rejection, you're not alone. We've been there as well. And to any ex-Muslim not inside the West, my empathy reaches out to you and your pain in the same way that it reaches out to my LGBT plus siblings who often face the same punishments as you for daring to be open about who they are. And I urge anyone in the LGBT plus community watching this, reach out to them. We've had generations to build up our systems of support and networks. Why don't we share that with them? We have an unparalleled opportunity to show these people some kindness, and I would argue that we should embrace that. I would love for the LGBT plus section of the British Humans Association to get into contact with the Council of Ex-Muslims and organise something, a joint event, anything, because I really believe that a lot of ex-Muslims could benefit from our experiences in being in the closet and slowly advancing society so more and more of us can come out, and also the amazing community that exists within the LGBT plus community. It could benefit them a lot, and I think it's something that should be looked into. Fact is, BBC Trending didn't stop there. They went on to produce a rather disgraceful video, which only displayed the full tweets of the counter-campaign, merely flicking through the original campaign tweets, which, by the way, were all cropped, so you could only see the first half of the tweet, you couldn't see the entire thing, so you couldn't get their story, their message. This sort of deliberate cropping of the original campaign tweet, so none of their messages get out, but showing the full, this hashtag is hateful and 2 billion Muslims can't be wrong, you're painting them all with a brush when no one was being painted at all. It was ex-Muslims coming forward talking about their experiences. It really does just show how the BBC was completely partisan here. It selected a side and went around it completely disgracefully. And it just wasn't apologetic over it. So I will link that down below so you can check it out yourself, seeing as you cannot comment on the podcast, so you can comment there instead if you wish, and show the BBC whether you agree with the way that they've taken a rather biased stance or question that. So, with that said, again, my heart goes out to those people, and if there's anything that we can do, then let us know. Thank you.